Well, jump! Go ahead and jump! Get it and jump! Go ahead and jump! 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 Jump!
Hi everyone, I'm sorry I can't be there. My name's Graham Wilson, I'm from the University of Glasgow, and this talk is about using translational gain to give people the sensation of jumping superhuman distances in VR. And we all know that jumping is a valuable physical activity. It benefits strength, fitness, or just simply having fun. And so research has also incorporated jumping into VR for locomotion, both horizontally and vertically, for exercise and rehabilitation, or for enhancing the user experience, including through translational gain. But the physical space available for VR experiences is often limited. There are issues of safety for fast ballistic movements like jumping in VR. And small physical jumps also mean small virtual jumps, so it limits the kinds of experiences that people can have. Redirected jumping research has found how we can avoid obstacles in jumping to keep people safe. And translational gain, or amplifying the virtual jump, leads to larger perceived jumps. But most amplified jumping research only measures the imperceptible thresholds, so the smallest amount of gain that you can get away with. This maximizes the comfort of the user as it minimizes the mismatch between the virtual and physical motion. But it also then limits the kind of amplified jumps that participants can have, generally only 20 to 40% bigger than the physical jump. However, overt, so supra-threshold or obvious gains, do work when walking or turning in previous research. They're comfortable, acceptable, and appropriate for use. And so much higher obvious gains could lead to both larger virtual jumps and a more enhanced experience. But we don't know how these obvious gains affect cybersickness, the sense of the user's control over their jump as opposed to being moved for them, and also the feeling of jumping versus, say, moving through teleportation. What are the maximum comfortable thresholds for gain? So what's the full range of gain that we can use? And what are the thresholds for all three jumping axes, forward, vertical, and sideways? And these are the questions that we explored in our research. The virtual environment we used was a low poly city environment used in previous research, as it provides a good geometric complexity for a sense of vexation or self-movement. The participant would stand in the middle of a long street and then either jump forward down the street, sideways down the street, or vertically on the spot while facing a building during each trial. The jump detection was based on just the MetaQuest 3 headset and the controllers in a similar way to previous research. The jump detection was based on the current headset height versus the baseline height that we calibrated per participant at the start of each study. For each jump, the participant held down the grip button to activate the gain, and then they performed the jump. And only when the headset was above that starting height, the gain was applied to both the X and Y axes. And gain continued to be applied until the headset was at or below the original starting height. Here we see a demonstration of jumping forwards. First of all, with no gain applied, so just at 1 times. And after the trial, the participant would answer a few questions based on their experience just during that trial. Here we see a 22 times amplification, 62, and a maximum 142 times gain, so the biggest gain they could have experienced. Here we see sideways, where participants jumped sideways down the street while facing the buildings for added vection cues, again starting with no gain applied. Now 22 times gain. 42 times, 122 times, and 142. And finally, vertical jumping, which was done facing a large tall building so that they got vection throughout the entire jump. Here's 22 times gain, 42 times, 102, and 142. For the full details on how we measured the threshold, you can see the paper, but overall we used an adaptive staircase approach, illustrated in the bottom right corner. 8 trials were experienced for each jump type, starting at a perceivable gain level of 2 times. Each trial, the gain level automatically changed based on the comfort of the previous trial. So if that trial was considered comfortable, rated as comfortable by the participant, so rating of 5 or more out of 10, the gain increased for the next trial. If it was rated as uncomfortable, less than 5 out of 10, it decreased for the next trial. The gain would change by a given delta, which started at 20 times based on pilot testing. And this delta was halved in size when the ratings changed between comfortable and uncomfortable, or vice versa. And so it meant that through this, we could hone in on the threshold value for the final trial and take that as the threshold. We used a within subjects design where all jump types were experienced in a counterbalanced order. There was one 8-trial staircase per condition to balance the amount of data we got and the fatigue of participants. The study always started with an unamplified practice, safety and familiarization session for participants where they got to practice jumping the 3 ways in a safe and consistent manner. After each trial, participants answered per trial questions in the headset, and we reset both their physical and virtual position. Then after each jump type condition, they removed the headset to answer a number of questionnaires. And finally at the end, participants were interviewed about the kind of nature of the experience. We only had one independent variable of jump type, forward, sideways and vertical. And the dependent variables were split across different stages of the study. We had per trial measures on a 10-point Likert scale where participants rated their comfort, how comfortable they felt, how much it felt like they were jumping, ranging from teleporting to jumping, their sense of jump ownership, as opposed to the machine controlling their jumping, and their feeling of enhancement, so from no enhancement up to superhuman enhancement. There are also various per condition measures where you can see the paper for details, but these include the maximum comfortable threshold itself, as well as subjective metrics such as exertion, ease of control, enjoyment, and their willingness to use jumping in VR. For full results, you can see the paper, but in terms of the maximum comfortable gain, the thresholds were 107 times for forward jumping, 122 for sideways, and 121 for vertical. So really huge gain levels. And you can see a rough approximation of the virtual jump to the physical jump in the illustration here. In terms of comfort, it remained high across gain levels. In the illustration, you can see gain on the x-axis and comfort on the y, and the vast majority of all ratings were well above the threshold level of the red line. There was no effective jump type on the maximum comfortable gain, and most participants did not experience discomfort at all. They maxed out the gain entirely. However, a third of participants did experience some discomfort at gains ranging from 11 to 62 times. In terms of the experience of jumping and felt like jumping versus teleporting, forward jumping felt significantly more like jumping than sideways and vertical. And for forward jumps, even gains of more than 100 times still felt like jumping as opposed to teleportation. However, for sideways and vertical jumps, the feeling of jumping did decrease as gain increased, but it was still high at around a 50 times gain. For feelings of jump ownership, again, forward was significantly higher than vertical, and there are similar correlations to the previous felt like jumping metric, where the feeling of jump ownership had declined for sideways and vertical motions as gain increased. And then for feeling enhanced, compared none to superhuman, there was no effective jump type with high levels of feeling enhancement across jump types, and the sensation of enhancement increased as gain increased, with a feeling of being superhuman, so kind of crossing that middle line, arising at about 25 times gain and increasing more slowly above that. In terms of the per condition metrics, there were no effects of jump type on any of them. There was overall a low level of exertion across conditions. The realism was fairly moderate despite the large levels of amplification they were experiencing. There were high feelings of safety, again considering the large jumps. Ease of control, enjoyment and mastery were all high, and importantly, the willingness to use jumping in VR was significantly higher when gain was applied. So using gain made people much more willing and likely to use jumping as it was more fun or engaging. From their interview comments, participants conveyed that at high gain levels, it started to feel a bit less like jumping. For example, it was like being a chess piece that somebody is picking up and moving in an arc, or it felt like I was thrown, like in circus cannon people, or like a big spring like in the video game Sonic. But there were also significant feelings of being enhanced, so it just gives you more power and control over the jump. Yeah, like I'm a superhuman here. Or it felt like I was achieving more. There were also strong feelings around speed and weight. So for example, inside the game I was really light, but my body in real life was quite clunky. Or there was a desire to hang in the air and get that bit in the film where Spider-Man jumps and he spirals his arms as he's jumping. So because our artificial gravity pulled people down as fast as they moved up, it didn't feel quite right and wasn't quite as satisfying as being able to control their descent in different ways. And there are also a range of different metaphors and comparisons for how translational gain felt when jumping in VR. So of course, I did get Big Frog vibes, was one, but also I feel like I'm the Incredible Hulk. So from our results, we produced a number of guidelines. Firstly, high gains of more than 100 times are largely comfortable for all jump types, but a calibration is needed to ensure comfort across all participants. To maximize jump ownership, consider using lower gains of only 20 to 40 times, particularly for sideways and vertical jumps. Amplified jumping can instill a range of player characteristics in the user, including circus cannons, springs, superheroes, and frogs. Jumping under high gain is still considered safe and controllable, which means that smaller physical jumps can still enact large virtual jumps. There are safety concerns over collisions, which mean that we need new boundary tools, as the current proximity-based boundaries aren't sufficient for these fast ballistic movements. And finally, gain can be a strong motivator to perform real jumping in VR. The increased enjoyment and willingness to use jumping could facilitate fun or exergaming. Thanks for listening. If you have any questions or comments or want to talk to me, I'll be on the ISMAR Discord, or you can find me at the email address on the screen just now.